Okay, so this is an example of a budget narrative that really does not address what we're looking for. So this entity was requesting advertising fees, professional and technical services, contract maintenance services, custodial services, etc. This third column here is where the people are instructed to describe the costs in that line item. And as you can see, all they did was copy over the name of the line item. So this does not tell us anything. They have $3,565 worth of advertising fees, and we can make no determination on if any of that is allowable or eligible. This should spell out what is included in that advertising estimation. You had to come up with the number somehow. How did you come up with that number? Just document it for us so we understand your process for creating this estimate and making sure that it's done in an allowable way. And, you know, the more forthcoming you are here, the better, because, you know, you may omit something through this narrative and it may get through on your invoice, but when we come in for our technical assistance review and do a deep dive of your finances, we'll find that you had unallowable costs invoiced, and then you're going to be in a payback situation. So at the end of the day, you know, these costs aren't going to go through. They'll catch up. So it is always best to be as forthcoming and detailed as possible when it comes to these things, because this is how we be proactive and making sure that, you know, you are ultimately implementing the project in a compliant way. So something like this would not be accepted. We would either deny the project or come back to you and say this all needs redone. And it would be a pretty quick turnaround because we do not have a lot of time once applications are submitted to wait for people to redo their applications. So if we do come back to you and allow corrections, you usually only have a couple days to address the concerns before we move forward in scoring as is. So it is always best to dedicate some time to getting this right up front, because yeah, it could be the difference in being awarded or not. So put a big X on this just to reiterate, this is not what we want to see. So here is an example of where they have given a lot more detail in terms of how they are coming to their estimations. So in this example, they have costs under labor. They are requesting funds for operators' salaries and wages. They have indicated to us they have 6 full-time drivers, 9 part-time drivers. They are being directly billed to the grant. They are reimbursed at a rate of $10.69 an hour, and the full-time drivers work 2,080 hours and the part-time drivers work 1,170, and that is how they are coming up with the costs for that line item. They have included the other salaries and wages with dispatchers, other staff who are going to be charged the grant. And this also helps us understand what types of 2 CFR 200 guidance documentation they should have submitted. So if you have indirect costs, meaning you have some method for allocating the cost to the program, it's not, you know, a direct bill of this many hours was worked, this is how we're billing it, then you may have to submit guidance documentation for indirect costs. And so by, you know, this budget narrative being completed correctly and accurately, it helps us also make sure that you're addressing the financial management compliance points as well. So I really cannot stress enough how important these budget narratives are, and we will not accept budget narratives that do not adequately explain how you came to your estimations. Check mark, yay. I also want to provide some scalability examples since this may be new to some of you. So this is some examples that we've had in the past for these are from public transit applications, but the concepts are still the same. In this example, the applicant requested $100,000 for bus shelters. And when they were asked if the project was scalable, they indicated it was, and that they could accept as little as $20,000. And when they were asked to describe how the scope would be modified if the funding was reduced, they simply explained that if you reduce the funding, we will just install fewer shelters. So that gives us a good idea of, okay, basically our range on this project is $20,000 to $100,000. They could use anything between that range, and if we fund less, it just means less shelters. In the second project, that applicant requested $300,000 initially to replace their parking lot, but said, we could go down to as low as $150,000. If we don't get the full request, then we may have to only repair the asphalt, only repair the concrete, or do one side at a time. So that really gave us a good idea of exactly what would happen if we reduced the project. There were other examples that were not good examples where people made requests, and then we asked if it was scalable. They said yes, and then they provided in the scope section said, we really need this funding. This is really important. And it's like, well, if it's not scalable, don't feel pressured to put that it's scalable. It doesn't, just because it's not scalable doesn't mean it won't be selected. As I mentioned earlier, it just is something we have in our back pocket if we get down to the wire and funding starts to run out and we still have a handful of projects to consider. Is it all or nothing, or is it somewhere in between? That's all you're communicating to us. So don't just indicate yes because you think it's what we want to hear. We're genuinely wondering if it's scalable, and if it is, we do want to see some specific information about how the scope will change if it is scaled down. Since this is a new question as well, I wanted to kind of maybe run through some scenarios that you might not consider that could be correlated in your application. The first bullet should say replacement vehicles. It says expansion vehicles. I just overlooked that, but pretend it says replacement vehicles. But one thing is like replacement vehicles and preventive maintenance funds. If you are someone who's seeking those projects, one thing to consider is if you're saying I need 3 replacement vehicles, because I have these 3 vehicles that are very old, but you only get 1 maybe. Something that you should consider is, will my preventive maintenance budget go up if I don't get those vehicles replaced? Because in theory, if you're not replacing them with new vehicles, then you're going to have more maintenance costs with maintaining that older fleet. So you should kind of be thinking about those connections. Shop equipment isn't maybe a good example for anyone here because unless you're a public transit, you're not going to be applying for shop equipment, but consider like radios and replacement vehicles. If you are applying for radios, and some of those radios would be installed in new vehicles, new replacement vehicles, but you don't get them, then you obviously would need less radios, right? So that would be something that you would outline. So these are just some scenarios to consider. They might not be applicable to you, but hopefully this kind of gets your mind moving in terms of, okay, let me think about my projects and how they might be connected, and making sure that you're connecting those dots for us. This isn't necessarily a best practice, so to speak, but this is so important for a successful application that I feel the need to reiterate this. I just want to go back over this that, again, vehicle cost worksheets have to be completed for each vehicle request. So, on our webpage, we will have the MMV worksheet, for example, and the MMV worksheet will have up to 10 tabs. So if you're requesting 3 MMVs, you're going to complete 3 tabs on the MMV worksheet. Those vehicles need to be represented individually. So I just really want to stress that because that's kind of a departure from instruction in the past. And it's very important for your successful application that you note that and comply with that. Double check your project information. This is the best practice. We have common reasons for returning applications to people is they've attached the wrong attachments, right? Application certification and authorizing resolution both start with A, and they just weren't paying close attention, and they uploaded the authorizing resolution twice instead of putting the application certification in there, or whatever it may be, and then we don't have what we need to consider your application. We got to come back to you, and maybe that, it just double check and make sure that you have what you need in the right spot. We have situations where the amounts that you indicate in the project section don't match up with supporting documentation. So for example, you said a vehicle in your project section of the application that a vehicle was $50,000, but then on your worksheet, it says 70,000, and then the problem with that is now we have to decide which is right, and now we have to seek clarification. So just taking that extra time to make sure that everything complements each other is going to bode well for you in the end. And then just making sure the authorized official has signed all the documents. One, just making sure that you've gotten all the required signatures. You haven't uploaded a document that required a signature that didn't have one. But then two, making sure that someone who isn't listed on the authorizing resolution isn't signing documents, because it's, we can't consider those. The board or county commissioners or whoever it may be has designated someone who can communicate with ODOT on the agency's behalf, and that's who we're looking to sign information or sign documents. And all this goes to the advice of referencing the checklist. So we will have an application checklist that kind of hits on those high level important details that are easily overlooked. And so before you hit submit, access the checklist and just run through it. Make sure everything is in proper order before you click that submit button.